Baseball. America's pastime.
God damn it.
But in LA, who is on first? Did we already ask that?
Please, God. Get started.
So there were a lot of assorted minor leagues on the West Coast, and LA was fortunate to be a part of pretty much every single one of them.
Okay.
There was one that was as major league as you can get in the minor leagues, but I'm going to say that one for when you're good and ready for it.
Okay.
So be good, behave, and you'll hear.
I have my catcher's mitt, my knees are bent, and I'm waiting for the
pop.
The pop.
Shove it. Right?
You got sports down for sure. You were athletic for like a week in your life, and you got them all mixed up.
And then I threw up.
Play puck.
The first baseball game to happen in LA is believed to have taken place sometime in the 1860s at St. Vincent's College downtown. It was an ancestor of Loyola Marymount.
Oh, really? Okay.
There were college games like these and high school games, but an actual semi-pro minor league of sorts started in the early 1890s in the form of the California League, which consisted of an unwieldy 6 teams. One of these teams was called the Los Angeles Serifs.
Like the font?
Yeah,
like the type?
They played against the Hollywood Times New Romans. So the Serifs, they soon became called the Angels. So they lasted only 1 year, and they had no affiliation with the Angels that we'll soon be talking about, and even less affiliation with the Angels that you're thinking of, and little to no affiliation with the Heavens Angels.
Because there's no afterlife.
Yeah. Because this is all there is. After this, we're just in the ground and we decompose. That's why we play baseball. People.
We play baseball on those grounds too.
If you're lucky, maybe your DNA will be reincarnated to be a catcher's mitt.
They buried me in center field.
So, bury my heart on the foul line. So it was these Los Angeles Angels, though, that played the first night game on the West Coast ever in 1893 against the team from Stockton at a place called Athletic Park, which I believe was LA's first baseball stadium. It was located near 7th and Alameda downtown.
Okay.
Apparently the concept of a baseball game at night was so novel that the players just couldn't contain themselves, and they would come to bat holding broomsticks and umbrellas. And the umpire was calling the game while holding a bulldog on a leash. And get this, the game had to be put on pause for a while when the bulldog caught the ball in his mouth, and he would not obey the command to drop it.
MVP.
Most valuable puppy.
Son of a...
I think that's an Air Bud movie.
I think that was a joke in Pound Puppies.
This was the real life event that inspired Air Bud.
Except he was put in a dog fight later that year. It was very dark.
Air Bud fights for his life.
And loses. There's no afterlife.
So another league popped up around this time called the Pacific National League, which in 1903 had a team in it called simply Los Angeles.
Great.
Which didn't even last for a full season, this league.
Really making us look good with all that creativity there. Los Angeles.
Wait till you hear some of the team names that come up later. I purposefully put in as many names as I could because they're so ridiculous.
Oh, God. Can we change the name of the podcast to any one of these names since it can't be Ray Gun Gothic anymore?
Let's just call it Los Angeles. We'd show up
we
on Google.
Would certainly get noticed.
A more successful league than this one was the Southern California Trolley League, which started in 1910. I don't know why exactly they called it the Trolley League, but I do know that the Southern Pacific Railroad did sponsor some recreational teams in Arizona, so Huntington and Harriman might have had their hands in this.
Yeah, because they're competitive to the very end. Oh, you got yourself a stickball? I got myself baseball.
You got yourself a baseball? I got myself a...
women's softball?
The only thing higher on the food chain than baseball. I also know that this organization, the Trolley League, was considered a Class D league.
Like Bat News Bear Class D?
Yeah. Whatever league Air Bud was in, that's... Here comes some team names that were in the Trolley League. The Long Beach Clothiers.
Great.
The Santa Ana Walnut Growers.
Oh my God.
The Los Angeles McCormicks.
Those 4 players of the McCormick family, they weren't very good.
Grandma McCormick had a mean curveball.
It's racist.
That's why it was mean. There were the Los Angeles Myers. That's a name that'll come back up. The Pasadena Silk Socks.
Oh.
And my favorite, the Redondo Beach Sand Dabs.
What does any of that mean? What's a clothier?
I think that's someone who sells clothes.
Not someone who wears clothes? I hope.
Someone who sells clothes, I hope, also wears clothes, so sure. I don't know what a sand dab is.
No idea.
It might be racist. It might be a crab or something. I don't know.
I think it's when you have whoopee with the sand at the beach.
A quick dab in the sand. In 1913, there was also the Southern California League that had teams like the Pasadena Millionaires.
Oh, not popular.
And the Long Beach Beachcombers.
Redundant? Well,
Redundant Beach. It's more like it. The most important one of these leagues was the California State League, which was started in the 1890s, but by 1903 evolved into the Pacific Coast League, which is the one you'll remember.
Okay.
But again, I'm going to get to that. Okay. So back off.
All right. I have a question.
Stop being such a sand dab. Question?
Are you going to bring up the Pacific Coast League?
Please see the principal. Immediately. So let's step away from the minor league chum for a minute and talk about the big boys that would come to LA long before the Dodgers betrayed Brooklyn. There weren't any Major League Baseball teams on the West Coast until halfway through the 1900s, but there had always been nice weather here, so a lot of pro teams would come to LA to conduct their spring training. In 1907, the New York Giants played against that team from St. Vincent's downtown in 3 spring training games. In 1914, a park called Brookside Park was built in Pasadena near the Rose Bowl. Okay. And in 1932, they added Brookside Park baseball field. Just a year later than that, it attracted the Chicago White Sox, not the Silk Sox from Pasadena, the real Chicago White Sox. And they came to have their spring training there, and they kept coming back every year up until 1950, with a couple of years off for World War II.
Just a couple.
Just to relax.
They just wanted to see Europe.
Or Japan.
What was left of it.
So in 1938, you'll find this interesting.
I bet.
In 1938, the White Sox played Pasadena City College, and the Pasadena shortstop was a local boy who got 2 hits in that game. That boy? Jackie Robinson.
Really?
Yeah, Jackie Robinson spent part of his youth growing up in Pasadena, which I had no idea. Yeah. So he was growing up playing in Brookside Park, and he made such an impression on the White Sox, who kept coming back every year, that in 1942, they gave him a secret tryout at Brookside Park to see if he would fit in on their team, but the league wasn't integrated yet, so in the end, it just didn't work out.
Wow.
In 1988, Brookside Park got renamed Jackie Robinson Memorial Field, but before that, they filmed an episode of The Munsters there.
Did anyone even play baseball in that episode?
You want me to watch every single Munsters episode? Because I gladly will.
Want me to do it right now? We could make a podcast about us watching the Munsters. Guys, you getting this? Guys.
Everybody. Team? Hello? The other team from Chicago had an even deeper relationship with LA, the Cubs. They first came to spring train at Schutz Park in 1903,
Really?
which we talked a little bit about last week.
Yeah.
But I'll get to more later on Schutz Park. They came March 11th, left March 23rd, but not before playing a few games against the mighty Los Angeles Lulus,
which is a team of little girls licking lollipops.
They got renamed the Angels a little bit after that.
That's
still little girls licking lollipops.
But they were dead now.
So then the Cubbies came back in 1905 and spring.
Were they full-grown bears now? The Bears.
Yeah. That's how the Bears came.
Completely different
Are the
sport.
Bears just... No, they're not. They're not just like an elderly version of the Cubs, are they? Are the Bears a football team?
Pretty sure. We should know this.
We should call Chris Farley. We really should.
Yeah, Robert Smigel's not picking up the phone for me anymore.
So they came back in 1905 and they spring trained in Santa Monica, but then they stopped coming for a while until 1917 when they actually started using Brookside Park also. Then in 1919, chewing gum fiend and part owner of the Cubs, William Wrigley Jr., bought Catalina Island for $3 million, the whole island.
What do you... he bought the island in Catalina?
Yeah.
Did he really?
He owned.
Are you making this up?
I make everything up on it. He owned Catalina Island.
That's
the whole thing.
He grew chewing gum trees. Yeah, chewing gum trees, chewing gum canes. Yeah,
and a lot of slaves. Yeah, he owned the entire island. Those were the days when you could just buy an island.
Off your fortune you made from making chewing gum.
So then in 1921, he gained controlling interest in the Cubs, and that same year brought them to Catalina as the new throne of their spring training rituals. The weather, of course, was always perfect, so they would exercise on the mountain terrains and run along the goat paths, and Wrigley built for them the world's very first Wrigley Field, which was right near Avalon. The one in Chicago, Wrigley Field, is older, but it was still called Cubs Park at the time, the Cubs Park. But this one on Catalina had the same dimensions as the one in Chicago, so they could train accurately.
What a weird, Enter the Dragon, team they would be if you had to take a boat to go to an island to play a baseball team.
I've heard legends of these tiny bears that play baseball on Catalina Island.
The hardest thing is
the chewing gum fiend's fortress.
Gum ghouls.
The Chicago Gum Ghouls. So the team being there brought huge tourism to the island, of course, and combined with the ease of Pacific Electric excursion trains taking you right to the harbor to get there, and it was free to watch the inter-squad practice games on the team, so everyone was going there. The Angels, I'll explain who they are soon, they would come to the island to play them, as would the New York Giants sometimes. Okay. The actor Joe E. Brown, who's the guy who falls in love with Jack Lemmon in Some Like It Hot.
Okay.
He would put together teams of movie stars in the 30s and come to the island to challenge the Cubs.
Did you get names?
Joey Brown, Wyatt Earp, Charlton Heston,
Harpo Marx.
Zeppo Marx. The Cubs would go on to the mainland every once in a while to play some of the minor league teams, but they just loved being on the island. And Wrigley loved it there too, and he loved the team. He'd invite them to his mansion to have barbecues, and he would take them on fishing trips. He would arrange mountain goat rodeos for their enjoyment.
Wow.
The slowest player on the team, he would hunt for sport at the end of spring training. Unleash them all into the buffalo fields.
He's gonna bury you in a
chewing gum packet.
Yeah, chewing gum packet. What's that silver wrapper? What's that material called? Help me.
Aluminum.
Aluminum, thank you. Aluminium?
That's it.
I saw an advertisement for it. Anywho.
So in 1937, this is also interesting. In 1937, a radio man for the Cubs came with the team on their annual spring training trip, and one day he went onto the mainland and took a screen test and decided he wanted to start acting instead of being a radio man. That man? Ronald Reagan.
The actor?
And I bet Jerry Lewis was with him too. He was the general manager. Let's try Future Boy.
That Ronald Reagan, just everywhere, huh?
He is everywhere.
He's been everywhere, man.
So the Cubs trained on Catalina until 1941 when the island was taken over by the military for World War II.
My gum, my precious gum!
No, they'll find my cachet.
I can't imagine people come in here with their helmets and they're chewing everything.
We'll lure the Japanese into Bubblegum Cove. Since they didn't have this island anymore, they had to settle for Indiana during those years.
The spot-on replica of Catalina.
The sucking candy capital of the world. So they came back in 1946, but from then on, the weather on Catalina wasn't as good as it used to be. And then in 1951, it started snowing when they were there. So they figured, that's enough of this place. It's time to move on. So they eventually settled on Arizona for their spring training. But while those facilities in Arizona were being built, they wanted to return to Catalina one last time in 1966. The plans fell through, so they had to play at Blair Stadium in Long Beach instead. Blair Stadium.
Can we get a good hot dog around there? I'm just sitting there on stone steps, cold, nowhere to park. Listen, I've never been to Blair.
I don't think it exists anymore.
Good.
The field on Catalina is no more. It's now the Catalina Island Country Club, but plaque marks the spot, and the Country Club clubhouse is still the original Cubs clubhouse. That might have been the most confusing sentence I've ever heard.
If we went to the golf grounds and tried to play a game of the old b-ball, what would they do?
Well, they kicked me out because I'm Jewish. And they'd put you to work holding the caddies, not even the clubs.
I can't even be a caddy.
You have to carry the caddies around.
You carry Mark around.
The other major league team to make a big impact on the city was the St. Louis Browns. The story of the Browns in LA was almost a perfect alignment of circumstances, but then they all fell through. So in 1941, there were serious talks to move the St. Louis Browns to play professionally in LA in the stadium where the Angels, I'll explain who they are soon, were playing, and to boot the Angels to the field of that everyone has to settle on eventually, Blair Stadium yet again in Long Beach, as their farm team. Unfortunately, Pearl Harbor happened around that time and tension was high in LA. And then the Battle of LA just illustrated how tense of a place it was here, so the deal just fell through. No one wanted to be here. But then after World War II, Burbank became a boom town. So in 1946, the city built Olive Memorial Stadium for $64,425 at 111 That's it. That's all the ones. Olive Avenue, right near the Talleyrand. The Browns weren't moving to LA, but they could at least spring train there. So in 1949, they did just that. The players would stay across the street from the stadium at the Olive Manor Motel, and the growing local population was very into it. The St. Louis Browns are considered by many people to be the worst team ever to play baseball.
How bad do you have to be for them to consider you the worst team?
You have to practice in Burbank. That's how bad you have to be. But
Burbank closes at 4 o'clock.
The beautiful native citizens of Burbank didn't care how bad they were. They don't know better.
They were just so busy getting early bird breakfast.
So Olive Stadium could seat 1,000, but sometimes upwards of 30,000 people would come to watch the Browns. They were like on the shoulders of the players. I don't know where they were. They loved them so much that sometimes they would refer to them as the Burbank Browns, but for whatever reason, nobody tried to reboot those negotiations to move them here. And in 1952, that was the last time they came to train. I think the St. Louis Browns are like the Baltimore Orioles or something like that.
Okay.
I don't know.
Sure. I don't know.
This isn't Baltimore meekly. So the stadium itself went on to be used as a practice center for the Rams, but in 1989, it was closed for use and demolished 1995. All that remains of it is its World War II memorial plaque, again, Plaque marks the spot. I'm finally going to tell you the stories of LA's two big minor league teams. So these were not merely professional teams that spent a few pleasant weeks entertaining the locals in town every year, only returned to their cities that were as cold as their hearts. These were LA's teams. So one of these was the local favorite that was no stranger to winning and went on to have a happy ending. The other was the underdog that only rose up momentarily and never really amounted to much.
I love that movie you just described.
The LA Meekly of teams. Also, it's the plot of Air Bud 3.
We're actually sponsored by Air Bud 3.
The Budcast.
Most valuable podcast.
Let's start with the former successful one because nobody likes an underdog.
Yeah.
Their story begins back yet again at Schutz Park, which to recap was an amusement park opened in 1887 that was bordered by Grand on the west, Maine on the east, Washington on the north, and 21st on the south. Listen to our last episode to hear more about that place and thank us for doing so. In 1900, a baseball diamond was built there, and in 1903, a team with no affiliation to the team from the 1890s of the same name that I already talked about set up home base there as the Los Angeles Angels of the Pacific Coast League.
Everybody wanted that name.
Nobody's very creative in the sports world.
No, they didn't get a BA in creative writing, you know what I mean? Daniel.
The baseball diamond seemed like a nice place to be, and after the games, the center field wall would open up and everyone would file into the amusement park.
Was this like a novel? This is like baseball teams and circuses and the carnival, like it's all like a novelty or what?
No, I mean, they were an actual team. It was just like, well, they're here. We might as well get them to play whack-a-mole. These Angels won the PCL, as I'm going to call it, championships here in this park, 1903, 05, 07, and 08. The baseball diamond was sufficient for a while, but a new place that promised a better facility was opening up nearby called Washington Park in 1911, and the Angels left Schutz Park for Washington Park, which was just a couple blocks west, for the start of the 1912 season. So Washington Park was also used as an occasional spring exhibition game location for the Chicago White Sox, and was also used as the site of many high school and college baseball, rugby, and football games.
Did they have football back then?
Yeah, it was called feetball.
Plurals got abolished in World War I.
Yeah.
We needed to use
All
them
the
for
plurals
rations.
died. It was immodest to show their bounty after World War I.
We had to use plurals for bullets.
So USC played 3 games there against Berkeley in 1915. We're talking football here, which is also the name of our sub-podcast.
Yeah.
We're talking football here.
Did Air Bud play football?
He played... What didn't Air Bud play?
My God.
Backgammon. He was the MVP. You know what that stands for. So the Angels won the PCL championships here in 1916, 18, and 21, which was the year that they were bought by a Mr. William Wrigley Jr., the chewing gum fiend.
God, the octopus.
That was the same year he gained control of the Cubs.
Okay.
So after a dispute with the owners of the park over some sort of parking situation,
Jesus.
Wrigley pulled his team from Washington Park in 1925, which got raised later that year and is now the Los Angeles Trade Technical College.
Hey, Trade Tech.
And he plopped them into the city's first true baseball stadium, Wrigley Field. So the place on Catalina was the first baseball field to have the name Wrigley Field, but this was the first stadium to bear that name a full year before the one in Chicago changed its name to Wrigley Field.
Suck it, Chicago. Yeah.
Put that in your deep dish and slice it. Our Wrigley was in South Central, bordered by San Pedro on the west, Avalon on the east, 41st place on the north, and 42nd place on the south.
That is deep.
Deep south.
Deep.
So it cost $1.5 million to build, which is about $13 million in today's dollars.
Yeah.
It could hold 30,000 people, and it was completely fireproof.
Fire doesn't purify.
Not this. There's no purifying in baseball. So as per Wrigley's wish, there were no ads or billboards anywhere to be found in this stadium. Come on. It's Wrigley. He's got gum money. The outfield wall was just a plain red brick, which turned out to be too rough on the outfielders' shoulders when they had to jump up against it. So they started growing ivy on it, just like the Wrigley Field in Chicago. Another quirk of the stadium was that the outfield fences were slightly angled towards home base, which led to there being an unusually high number of home runs that were hit in this park, which was convenient for the people living in houses that were very close to the stadium in the area who were constantly having their windows broken.
It's a pleasure.
Wrigley,
it's okay. I got gum money. I'll pay for your window. I have gum wealth. Maybe Wrigley will sponsor this episode.
Wrigley Field's most distinguishing feature was its 12-story, 100-foot-high clock tower. And as we learned last month, nothing in the city could be built at this time over 150 feet high. So this, in addition to the subway terminal building that was built the same year, was one of the highest man-made points in the city. The tower was dedicated the Wrigley Field Memorial Tower on January 15th, 1926, in honor of the baseball player players who had fought in World War I. So all of this combined with the stadium's observation platform where you could look one way and see the mountains and then turn around and see the ocean, and was really considered by a lot of people to be the nicest stadium in the country, period, Major League or otherwise. So the Angels played their first game here September 29th, 1925, winning 10-8 against the San Francisco Seals.
They were actually Navy SEAls. They were a tough team.
That's the most baseball statistics we're really going to get into in this game.
Man, I wanted to hear about RBIs.
Did someone say my nickname when I was younger? So the Angels had a good run at Wrigley and solidified their reputation as the best minor league team out there with championships in 1926, 33, 34, 47, and 56. Oh. They even had the best record in PCL history in 1934, winning 137 games and losing only 50 of them that year. Wrigley was so nice that the Angels just couldn't keep it for themselves, so it was used for a lot of other notable teams and events as well. Every mid-March, whenever the Cubs were still training on Catalina, Wrigley would, like I said, ship them onto the mainland for exhibition games against the Angels, repaying the favor that they came to Catalina. They were so generous. And the Angels would actually beat the Cubs when they would... Not in the game.
The street.
They're off the island. They're not under Wrigley jurisdiction. The New York Giants came to spring train here at Wrigley in 1932 and then again in 33, but then the Long Beach earthquake hit when they were here and they were too scared to come back.
I totally understand.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
So in 1936 up until 1943, the PCL set up their official headquarters in the offices at Wrigley. On January 15, 1939, the New York Football Giants played the All-American Stars in the first ever Pro Bowl game at Wrigley Field after the Coliseum denied them access because they wouldn't allow pro teams in it. On April 17th of that same year, Joe Louis had a boxing match at Wrigley. Lots of pro teams had exhibition games against each other at Wrigley as well. On March 20th, 1949, the Cleveland Indians played the Cubs. 1951, the New York Yankees came to Wrigley to play both the Angels and the Stars, who we'll get to soon. In this game, where the old PCL veteran Joe DiMaggio, getting ready for his last season in the big leagues, and also a young kid named Mickey Mantle getting ready for his first season in the big leagues. He was at this Wrigley Field. Then in 1955, the Cleveland Indians again played there against the New York Baseball Giants after they finally got over their fear of earthquakes. Took them 20 years. So on May 26, 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. gave a speech at Wrigley in front of 35,000 people. So being the nicest stadium in LA, it was used in a lot of TV shows and movies as well. The original Angels in the Outfield was filmed there.
Oh, really?
As was Pride of the Yankees, Damn Yankees, an episode of The Munsters, and the Twilight Zone episode, The Mighty Casey.
Oh, okay, I know that one.
Yeah, that one.
I never did.
The one with the pig faces, right?
There was time now. There was that one.
There's time. We got a whole other inning. Maybe most importantly, a 26-episode TV show called Home Run Derby was filmed at Wrigley in 1959. It was professional players would come hit home runs for cash. So Hank Aaron won $12,000 over his 6 appearances on the show. This TV show was the inspiration for the Home Run Derby, which is now a staple of the Major League Baseball All-Star Weekend, which started doing that in 1985.
Was it a fictional show?
It would really be Hank Aaron, and then he would hit a ball, but it would be a cartoon of a baseball going out the stadium.
Oh boy, I'm going for
That's $1,000, Mr. Aaron.
You could trade that in for 4 sticks of gum.
Chew Wrigley. But still, the main attraction at Wrigley Field was the Angels, the delightful little Angels. They had a huge fan base that was passionate about their team. After the umpire made a bad call at a game in 1952, the fans rioted and started throwing cushions and ran on the field.
They don't really get riots.
Well, one guy started wrestling the umpire.
Okay.
The umpire. He was a rebel. So it was a doubleheader, so the next game that day had to be monitored by a very large police force. The LA Railway Week pass tickets had ads printed on them to go watch the Angels.
Oh, that's awesome.
But as popular and successful as the Angels were, there was always another team watching enviously in the shadows.
I can't believe it, and I refuse to listen.
The malnourished Mets to the mighty Yankees. It all started with a team called the Vernon Tigers, which formed in 1909 in the California League, but joined the PCL once the California League failed.
If they ever got a movie, it'd be called The Pride of Vernon, which is something that people from Vernon have never heard before.
No. Best thing to come out of Vernon is True Detective Season 2.
You're speaking of Vinci. Go ahead.
Am I? I don't really know. They were located in the weird suburb of Vernon because at the time LA was a dry city and Vernon was not. And I'm not talking about a drought, unless you're thinking a drought of alcohol, in which case you're correct. The owner of the team was a meat packer named Peter Meyer, who built...
A regular meat packer, this
just
guy.
Your average meat packer, who built for the team a place called Meyer Fields, which was near the intersection of 38th and Santa Fe. It was sometimes called Vernon Park and was conveniently located next door to a place called Doyle's Tavern, which also, along with a place you talked about last week at Schutz Park, claimed to have the longest bar in the world.
Here we go with the competition again.
The competition of things we don't know what they mean.
Yeah, and like, what does it mean? People were competing for something that obviously did not make it past that year.
Because no one knew what it was. It was up for grabs. Yeah, we have the longest bar. What? All right, so do we. So there was a door going directly into the tavern from the left field wall that the crowd would enter from at the start of the game and then leave from at the end of the game. There's even word that some of the players would go through that door to get a beer in between innings.
Okay.
Not many people were coming to watch the Tigers in Vernon because they were drunk all the time. So in 1912, the meat packer moved the team to another place in the area where you could legally buy and sell alcohol, Venice.
Okay.
They became known as the Venice Tigers, and Meyer, the meat packer, built them a place to play there around Venice and Abbot Kinney, near where the library is now in the Venice of America Centennial Park.
The
Sensei Park.
Yeah.
It was a drive-in ballpark with room for 80 cars.
What does that mean?
I'm not really sure what that means.
That means you stay in your car and watch, but how is that possible? They're not projected unless the parking is elevated and you're facing down with your parking brake on, which I don't know if cars at the time could do that.
No, they couldn't. They didn't have brakes.
Maybe it's like a drive-through where you have to wait in the line and you get like a glimpse of it for a minute, and then you have to just pass on.
Yeah,
what does that even mean?
No, that's what it is.
No, you figured it out. Stop talking. You figured it out.
The Tigers would also get to play at Washington Park when the Angels were out of town, and the first game at Washington Park was actually a Tigers game versus the Boston Red Sox on March 11th, 1911. Yeah, I know. Against maybe the worst team that LA had. So still people cared even less about the Venice Tigers than they did about the Vernon Tigers. Yeah. So the meat packer Meyer figured they might as well move back to Vernon.
Pack some meat.
Pack them up as if they were meat. So after the 1915 season, he literally put the stadium on wheels and drove it back to Vernon.
What is it? What?
It was a drive-in stadium. We don't know what that means.
You're right.
Could have been inflatable.
It's a moon bound.
So he drove it back to Vernon, where they once again became the Vernon Tigers. In 1919, the meat packer had had enough of the Tigers, so he sold them to a one Mr. Fatty Arbuckle.
Are you serious?
Yeah. The actor who guided them on to win their first ever PCL championship in 1919 and 1920. In 1920 as well, the Tigers became official cohabitants with the Angels in Washington Park.
That's your movie. That's the Pride of Vernon.
Fatty Arbuckle. The Pride of Vernon. It was a proud time for the underdogs moving into Washington Park until it came to light that several of the players had been found guilty of fixing the games, and their reputation, if they ever had any, was destroyed. Still not the worst scandal that Fatty Arbuckle would ever get mixed up in. After a while, nobody seemed to want to go to a Vernon Tigers game, so in 1925, Fatty sold the team, and they were moved to San Francisco to become the San Francisco Missions. But you haven't heard the last of the old Vernon Tigers.
Oh no, they don't give up because they're Tigers.
Tigers never quit. I have them. For now, a team came in to fill the void of being the required inferior local team to the Angels. So in 1926, the Salt Lake City Bees moved to LA to become the Hollywood Stars.
Oh, okay.
At first, they were sometimes known as the Hollywood Sheiks, after the mascot of Hollywood High School, who in itself was named after the role that made Rudolph Valentino famous.
Mm-hmm. He's dead.
He's very dead at this point. Or is he? Yeah, he is.
Rudolph Valentino.
No, you're dead. Go away. Rudolph, go. Come on. Rudolph the dead-nosed reindeer.
There's no afterlife.
You forget yourself. You should be a baseball right now, or a piece of chewing gum. They were also sometimes referred to as the Twinks, completely unironically.
Only thin players, please, boyish.
Please. Hairless as well. This was a strange sort of interim team for the Hollywood Stars that you might know. This incarnation of the Stars had no home of their own to play in, so they somehow managed a deal to share Wrigley Field with the Angels. Again, like everybody just cling to the ankles of the Angels.
Ankle Angels.
The Los Angeles Ankles. So they managed to do pretty well for themselves, and they even won the championship in 1929 and 1930. A rivalry was even formed between the Angels and the Stars that seemed to reach a peak when a fight broke out during one of the games between the teams that lasted for an hour and had to be broken up by the LAPD.
What?
Yeah, they threw cushions at each other.
It went on for an hour because no one could hurt each other.
A weird side note, in 1933, the Stars spring trained at a place called Shell Oil Field, which was a field, not just an oil field, but also an oil field. It was in Long Beach, was surrounded by oil rigs, and cars would park around the baseball diamond to mark the foul lines. It looks like a hellish place. It's really weird. It's like if Mad Max had a baseball team.
If they finally pick up civilization, like, we're going to need some sports again.
Yeah. Let's start with this. What do we do? No, kill the elders.
Well, if you make it home, we kill you. The point of the game is to stay on second base the whole time.
Snap back to reality.
No.
Things seem to maybe be looking up for the stars, and then the Depression hit.
And the stars fell.
Shooting stars.
Because we shot them.
They were all shot and turned into currency.
There's no afterlife.
Not for a star. Not even for an angel.
By the time you see them, they've been dead for like 8 years. Anywho.
So they were always the lesser of the two teams playing at Wrigley, and their attendance wasn't great. And then by 1932, the Depression was really starting to be felt, and their attendance dropped in half. Then on top of that, the new owner of Wrigley Field, and what seems to be, because Wrigley died, and there's nothing left of him because he's dead.
You mean you can't just keep chewing them?
Well, he did die, but he never lost his flavor.
We just make fun of too many dead people.
So in what seems to be an attempt to try to make Wrigley Field strictly for the Angels, this new guy doubled their rent to play there to $10,000, which was not something that the Stars could afford.
Yeah.
So in 1936, the Hollywood Stars moved to San Diego to become the San Diego Padres, who would decades later join the major leagues, and that's who's there now. Same players, because they don't die. This is where the old Vernon Tigers, now known as the San Francisco Missions, come back into the picture. So in 1938, after 2 years of groups in LA begging the team from San Francisco to move back to LA, they finally relented due to their poor attendance up north, and the city once again had a baseball team called the Hollywood Stars. And this is the one that everyone remembers if you're 300 years old. So when they came back to LA, they were bought up by a new owner, and things started getting interesting.
Oh, good.
Familiar man in the peanut gallery of Los Angeles history.
An ostrich.
An ostrich wearing a monocle. Mr. Robert Cobb, the owner of the Brown Derby and creator of the Cobb salad.
Who might have been a relative of Ty Cobb, super racist?
Yeah, mega racist.
Mega racist. Yeah. Really? Robert Cobb?
Yeah, he was a old Vernon Tigers fan, so when the team moved back into town, he snatched them up like a free salad that's a gross relic of the past. The problem was there was nowhere for them to play, so they had to run yet again to the protection of the Angels at Wrigley Field. Bob Cobb knew it wasn't ideal because he wanted a place for the Stars to really come into their own and to also help pump up the rivalry between the Angels and the Stars, which benefited both teams. So in an effort to both try to raise funds for a new stadium and to also set the Stars on the path of being a more community-owned venture and branding them as the people's team of LA.
For the common man.
The Cobb man.
The guy who rides the yellow car all day.
The kind of guy who, he's not always on the red car. He takes the yellow car.
He gets it.
So Bob Cobb led a few notable citizens of Los Angeles in on the fun as part owners. These people were George Burns.
Oh my God.
Gracie Allen.
Where he went, she had to follow.
Of course. Barbara Stanwyck. Gary Cooper. Cecil B. DeMille. George Stevens. Bing Crosby. Walt Disney. And William Frawley.
Oh, they got Fred Mertz on the team?
Imagine Fred behind the bench.
I can only imagine him as an umpire. What are you doing there?
That was the condition. I'll part own your team if I...
Barbara Stanwyck.
This was the time when people were buying up hot dogs, like celebrities were buying up hot dog stands.
That's true. They had no class.
I don't know what's a worse investment, a minor league baseball team or a hot dog stand. This made them the Hollywood Stars baseball team, owned by the Hollywood Stars. That's how they sold it. So now for their new location, Bob Cobb entered into negotiations with the A.F. Gilmore Company. A.F. Gilmore was a farmer who in 1880 bought a 256-acre dairy farm in an area known as Rancho La Brea, that is now the Grove/Farmers Market /CBS. One day in 1900, he was drilling for water and he struck oil.
Oh, geez, the luck.
He was a real-life Beverly Hillbilly who was already in an area that was nicer than Beverly Hills at the time. So his son Earl started the A.F. Gilmore Oil Company and turned it into the largest independent oil company in California. Eventually, the old Gilmore dairy farm got turned into an amusement area of sorts. On May 23rd, 1934, Gilmore Stadium opened with an exciting show of motorcycle races.
Oh, cool.
It could hold around 18,000 people and was located where the big parking lot of CBS now is at Beverly and Fairfax.
Yeah, that long gate.
Yeah, the big gate. That used to be left field. In addition to exciting motorcycle races, the stadium also hosted boxing, rodeos, and dog shows. But it was and dog rodeos and horse boxing. But it was originally built with two things in mind. Football. It actually housed LA's first pro football team, the LA Bulldogs, and midget auto racings.
I'm shaking my head. You can't see me, but I'm shaking my head, denying that this is true.
I thought the same thing. Not little people, though, but little cars. Get this. It was a weird craze of the 30s that was invented in LA in 1933 at Loyola High School. And at Gilmore Stadium, crowds would pack the stands every week to watch them go.
Just when they crashed and 80 clowns come out?
Out of the trunk.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, people were weird back then.
Everything before like 1978 doesn't make any sense. Before Star Wars plays, nothing makes sense to me.
It brought order to the galaxy, just like the Empire, which was the position that William Frawley played. Also in this area were the Farmers Market, a Pan-Pacific auditorium, and a drive-in theater where the Grove now is. This whole oasis of pleasure was referred to as Gilmore Island.
Oh.
So the Stars stayed at Wrigley for a year and then moved into Gilmore Stadium for about a week, which was a horribly designed place for baseball until May 2nd, 1939, their new home officially opened, Gilmore Field. So it was built on the spot where Gilmore had originally struck oil, which was just a little east of Gilmore Stadium, deeper into CBS, before you hit the park that's across the street.
Oh, yeah.
7700 Beverly Boulevard, if you want to be exact, which I know you do.
Google mapping it right now.
It could fit 12,987 people and was always referred to as very intimate. The seats were right up against the playing field as opposed...
My nose against the...
It was required that you get your nose broken.
Before you go.
Yeah.
It loosens it up so you can be as close as possible.
Really get up close to the Stars. As opposed to Wrigley Field, it was one of the hardest fields in the PCL to hit a home run in. They sold it as Friendly Gilmore Field. The Stars did pretty well for themselves here, and their games were well attended by all the celebrities in town, including Lucy and Desi Arnaz, though it was doubtful that Fred would get them free tickets, the old miser. In 1955, Jane Mansfield, the same Jane Mansfield who presided over the dedication ceremony of the Rocky and Bullwinkle statue,
the very same,
was crowned Miss Hollywood Stars.
We love her.
I'm getting hot under the collar. The Stars even caught the attention of several major league teams. In 1946, the Stars landed an agreement with the Pittsburgh Pirates that gave a few of the pro players on their team to the Stars on loan to help boost them.
Wow.
This only lasted for one season, but the Pirates did maintain a relationship with the team and used Gilmore Field as their spring training hub in 1948. Also in 1948, the Stars became a farm team for the Brooklyn Dodgers.
Oh, wow.
So a lot of players advanced into the major leagues onto the Dodgers, but being part of the Dodger network also meant that some of the best players from other Dodger farm teams got transferred onto the Stars and made them an even stronger team. They eventually cut their ties with the Dodgers in 1951, and they figured they'd never run into them again.
Yeah, never will they ever cross
the Rockies, the north of the Mississippi. But then they bounced right back, the Stars did, and they linked back up with the Pirates and became their top farm team. One notable player on the Stars was Joe DiMaggio, his big brother Vince.
Oh, okay. I know he had a little brother playing. I didn't know he had there's three DiMaggios playing baseball.
Yeah, Trimaggios. That was their restaurant when they all retired.
It was bought out by Taco Tia.
The Angels were traditionally the dominant team in town, but from 1949 to 55, the Stars really started to dominate the LA baseball scene. They even managed to win the championship in 49, 52, and 53. The Stars were also the originators of some notable contributions to baseball as a whole. They were the first team to drag the infield after the fifth inning. This was done as a way to artificially create a break in the middle of the game to get more people to get up and buy more concessions.
Okay, smart.
Hollywood. They were also one of the first teams to adopt batting helmets in 1949.
After all the deaths, there's no afterlife.
Yeah, nothing. You might as well wear a helmet because, I mean, this is all you have. A weird contribution that they had was that in 1950, they became the first team to replace wearing trousers with wearing shorts and long socks during games.
Cowabunga. Kawabata?
Kawabata swing bunga.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, it looked embarrassing, but it helped keep the players cooler and it let them run faster.
But like cooler.
Yeah, I mean, sunglasses aren't for the sun, they're for the cool.
Thank you.
They wore them at all day games for about a season, and then I guess they got made fun of too much, and they relegated them to just the weekends and holidays until 1953 when they grew up and they put their pants back on. But no matter how popular they became or how good they looked in shorts, the city was, as always, changing. By the early growing, drifting, falling. By the early 50s, the old community-based group ownership system of the team was phased out, and as the decade went on, CBS had plans to build its television city on the land that Gilmore Stadium and field existed. So it looked like the Stars were going to be yet again without a home, and there were plans to bring them groveling back once more to Wrigley Field.
Oh my God.
But it was becoming clear that the Dodgers were going to be moving to LA, and Bob Cobb knew that with a major league team permanently located in town, people weren't going to be interested in minor league baseball anymore. Yeah. Interest already started to wane once major league games started being broadcast on live national TV in the late 40s, and suddenly nobody wanted to hear the PCL broadcasts on the radio that were recorded hours after the game was already over as recreations of the action that had already happened.
Oh, what, people don't like that sort of thing?
Well, how could they not?
Baseball, the radio show.
And Vince DiMaggio hits it, and a giant dinosaur swoops in. I swear it happened. Up until the 50s, these minor league teams were all the people on the West Coast had, so they were really thriving, and the teams in the league really were just as good as most of the major league teams anyway. Plus, some of the players were actually making more than the players in the major league did. The PCL was almost a major league, but it wasn't the major league. Yeah. There were offers from Long Beach and Mexico City to buy the Stars, but in another weird, confusing twist, Bob Cobb sold them back to Salt Lake City, where the other team had come from. It's confusing, where they became the new Salt Lake City Bees.
It's not the insect, it's the grade level of their plane.
Yeah, the B minuses. Bob Cobb sold them to Salt Lake City, and then he promptly buried his face in a salad. Their last game was on September 5th, 1957, with just 6,354 people watching, which is way below capacity.
Yeah.
The Salt Lake City Bees are still going strong in the PCL, which at this point is the second oldest minor league still around. But Gilmore Field did not have that longevity. It was raised in 1958. In September 1997, the PCL Historical Society, CBS, and the A.F. Gilmore Company dedicated a plaque to Gilmore Field on the wall outside of Studio 46 on the CBS lot where the field once stood. Again, plaque marks the spot. And it wasn't just the Stars that were being affected by this. The Angels managed to last a little bit longer, but only by 10 days, and they played their last game at Wrigley on September 15th, 1957. This was the end of the minor league Angels, but like I said, unlike the Stars, they managed to have a big league ending. In 1961, Gene Autry resurrected the old Angels, and they were baptized into the major league as the Los Angeles Angels. They even got their own home back, playing their first game back at Wrigley Field April 27, 1961, and because of the layout in that field that allowed for easier home runs to be hit, they set a major league record of 248 home runs in one season that has since been broken by men on steroids. They played one season there, and then they moved into Dodger Stadium for a few seasons, but by 1964, the city finally realized we don't always have to have two rival baseball teams, so they banished the Angels to the land of no return, Anaheim. Wrigley Field was voted to be torn down in 1964, and in 1966, the final nail in the coffin came when it was converted for soccer, and in March 1969, it was finally torn down for good. It is now the Gilbert Lindsay Recreational Center. So that was the end of minor league baseball in LA, courtesy of the Dodgers and Giants moving to California. But that's all fine and dandy for white people. But what about the non-whites that were playing baseball?
Is there such a thing?
If I were mayor. So while all this was going on, there was a whole other world of baseball going on that was primarily for the minorities who were being excluded from the major and minor leagues. Non-white teams were not allowed to play in PCL parks initially, so they had to build their own if they could. What seems to be the first of these was at 32nd and Long Beach in South Central that opened May 2nd, 1920, and housed the Alexander Giants, which was an all-African American team. They only lasted for 142 games, and then their stadium burned down. So they stopped.
Fire purifies all.
Should have had a Wrigley, which is also Wrigley's catchphrase.
That's also a threat. Should have had Wrigley's, boys.
It covered all grounds. Then came the Los Angeles White Sox, who were ironically all black, and they picked up all the fans who had grown attached to the Giants. They were alternatively called the Colored All-Stars, the Colored Giants, or the Bearcats.
I kind of like the Bearcats.
Yeah. You don't like Colored All-Stars? Why?
It makes me think of when you do really good in class and then give you a star, but it's like red or purple or
a colored all-star.
Colored all-star.
This was in 1921, and they played at a place called Anderson Park at Anderson and 4th in Boyle Heights.
That sounds familiar.
Maybe.
Great.
It might. I don't know what's going on inside your mind. This place soon came to be known as
You programmed me.
White Sox Park. I told you to stop reminding me of things. White Sox Park, it came to be known. It was usually hard to impossible for the black teams to find white teams that would accept their challenges to play some games. But there was something called the California Winter League, which was basically a league made up of 4 all-white teams comprised of players from both the minor and major leagues who would come out here to play and stay in shape during the off-season. But they would also be playing teams made up of African-American players from the Negro leagues.
Okay.
Again, not offensive. That's what they were called.
That's what they're called. You piece of
shit. The teams themselves were not integrated, but it was white teams playing black teams, which was a start of a race war. Games like these took place between the LA White Sox and some of the Winter League teams at Anderson Park. A couple of Italian-American fruit vendor brothers named Joe and John Peroni were fans of the Winter League, so they built a nicer place for these games to be played. It was called White Sox Park. It opened October 25th, 1924, was located at 38th and Compton, again in South Central, not far from where Wrigley Field was, and it could seat 7,000 people. It was the home stadium of the LA White Sox, but it also housed other black teams like the Los Angeles Stars, not the Hollywood Stars, the Monarchs, and the Sons of Italy.
Oh, I like that.
The names are going to start getting weird from here on out. Okay. The White Sox and the park itself built up a reputation, and on weekends and holidays, games would take place there between the black and visiting white teams, such as Shell Oil, White King,
I don't like that at all.
the Philadelphia Hilldale Giants, the Cudahy Puritans.
Cudahy?
What's Cudahy?
Cudahy's an area near Downey.
Okay, yeah, that's them.
Okay.
Unless, is Cudahy a place also?
That's also a place.
Also the Torrance Blues.
I like that.
Yeah, there ain't no cure for the Torrance Blues, though.
Because they kept losing.
Very bad management. One time a team of white all-stars was made out of the Winter League the best of the Winter League players to challenge the black White Sox.
Yeah.
I'm confused. And the White Sox beat the white all-stars very easily. Teams from Japan would even come here just to play at White Sox Park.
Really?
Buster Keaton used to come to work out with the black teams on Sundays during their pregame warm-ups, and he would go around making the audience laugh.
We all like Buster Keaton here. Hey. Fatty Arbuckle's questionable, but
Buster Keaton never did anything wrong. Tickets were 50 cents to go to games, and a lot of the proceeds would go to raise money for local South Central causes like building a hospital and stuff like that. Once the major leagues finally were integrated by Jackie Robinson in 1947, however, the Negro leagues lost all their best players, so interest started to wane and fewer games were played at White Sox Park until it was eventually demolished. The site is now the Ross Snyder Recreation Center. A challenger to the Negro League in town was the Mexican League.
That's way offensive for some reason.
I read
the emphasis that you put on it.
On league. I read that it was also called the Spanish League or the Mexican American League, but I'm sure whichever one sounds most offensive to you is what it was really called.
It wasn't even called anything. It was just a look.
You ever gone to a game? These teams were part of the LA Municipal Leagues for the most part, but some of them blurred the lines between being just a recreational league to being an unofficial semi-pro minor league team. The teams were formed by local businesses that would sponsor a team just to create goodwill in the community and keep kids occupied and out of gangs and things like that, which explains why they had names like the East Side Merchants, Moctezuma, who played in Downey Park, probably the best name, El Paso Shoe Store.
Wait, was this the sponsor of the team or the team?
Both. The answer to that question is yes.
Oh, we got beat by 7-Eleven last week.
Did you guys go to the fruit game? So the El Paso Shoe Store played in San Gabriel. There was the San Fernando Merchants, Ortiz Fords, Aztecas, Santa Monica Los Tigres.
Oh, I like that.
East Side Beer, Lucky Lager Beer, Alianza Mexican.
Okay.
Ornelas Market, Manuel's All-Stars, Jalisco Athletic Club, Eagle Rock All-Stars, Hawthorne Merchants, Coast Meats.
So fish
were not allowed in this league.
Coast
Meats.
We beat the meats.
A proud cry.
No one can beat our meats. Were they? Jesus. That was also the name of the league.
The Jesus.
The Jesus.
Manuel's Jesus. There was even something called the 46 Club, which was a team made up of Mexican players that were over 40 years old.
Oh, that's cool.
Most teams in the municipal leagues were Mexican, but there were many black teams, like some of the ones I just named, and even Asian teams like the all-Japanese Los Angeles Nippons.
Oh, okay. That's cool. Good for them.
They let them off Terminal Island. So they formed teams like these because, like the African Americans, they were not allowed in most recreational leagues, so they took matters into their own manos. They formed organizations like the Asociación Deportiva Hispanoamericana in 1927, which was started in LA by La Opinión, and La Asociación Mexicana del Sur de California.
Killing it.
In 1932. This period of time...
We have to make an appendix for this episode.
Yeah. You might want to consult your English to Spanish Bible. Yeah. But don't look too much into it because this is all we've got, people. This period of time, which was the 1920s to the 60s, is considered the golden age of Mexican-American baseball. And the best team that was out there, hands down, was right here in LA. It started with a guy named Mario Lopez. And it is the one you're thinking of. He was from Chihuahua, where he played baseball and was actually drafted by the Cleveland Indians, but his parents wouldn't let him because he was 16 years old. Eventually, he moved to LA and pretty much devoted all his free time to becoming the godfather, basically, of Mexican-American baseball scene. He started a team sponsored by the gas station he owned called Mario's Service Station. That was their name. And he got the best out of his players because he would give anyone who had a good game free gas.
Oh, that's nice of him.
Not just a good motivator, though, he was a good businessman. He saw that the city's Mexican population was growing, but nobody was selling the sort of food that they liked and missed from the mother country. So in 1934, he opened the Carmelita Provision Company, which sold Mexican food, whatever you eat. With this, he started a new baseball team that would play in Fresno, Belvedere, and mainly Evergreen Park in Boyle Heights, and they would draw huge crowds. Really? They would play on Sundays, and Lopez would give out free packets of chorizo to people in the stands, and then after games, he would take everyone, players and fans, out to places like the Joker's Den or the Silver Dollar to get beer and tacos, and he would pay for all of it.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that's expensive.
Hometown hero. I'm going to shake Mario Lopez's hand if I meet him.
You're so brave. The team won its first championship in 1948, and they officially rechristened themselves Los Choriceros.
Oh boy.
You don't like that?
No, I don't like that at all.
Is it better or worse than Carmelita Provision Company, the team?
Any of these teams with innuendo is just, I feel bad for.
So in a league where most teams only existed for about one season, the Choriceros lasted until 1973.
Wow.
And in that time, they won 19 city championships. They were so popular that their championship games were played at Wrigley or Gilmore Fields. They even occasionally played the Angels, I read. Teams from Mexico would come to LA just to play them, and then they'd return the favor and travel to Mexico to play them. So they were referred to as the Yankees of East LA.
That's really good.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm surprised I've never heard of them before. You'd think that there'd be some sort of legend floating around.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of the Choriceros?
Papa! You speak of the devil.
Baseball and the Choriceros in particular were a good thing for the Mexican-American community. The games were gathering places for families and friends, and it helped foster a sense of community. One such child in the stands of the Choricero games was a young Edward James Olmos.
Oh, little Eddie.
Yeah, Eddie Olmos. It also meant something to them seeing star athletes who were Mexican.
Yeah.
So these people who were working in the citrus fields all day for 5 or 6 days a week and going to these games and watching these great players who seemed like they could actually go somewhere with their talents other than just being a way to unwind watching these games since there was no TV or anything. It was seen as a way out for the younger generation.
That's cool.
One man in particular, Baldomero Mel Almada, who was a local boy who had come from Mexico, played at LA High School, worked in the citrus fields, played for El Paso Shoe. He worked his way onto the Seattle Indians of the PCL and got drafted in 1933 by the Boston Red Sox and debuted September 9th of that year to become the first Mexican to play in the major leagues.
Really?
So an LA guy, basically.
Hometown hero.
Hometown chorizo. Some people saw baseball as a way of folding Mexican immigrants into American culture. Some people saw that as a good thing. Some saw it as, you know, what are you doing, white person?
Yeah.
We're our own people.
Are you talking to me? I'm sorry.
Be your own person.
I'm just telling you, be you.
Be who you are, man.
Mario Lopez.
Just let yourself be a Lopez. It was also a way for Mexican workers to unite politically. These baseball teams were well connected to other Mexican communities since they would travel around the state to play, so ideas could spread and bonds could be formed. In fact, a lot of these Mexican ball players went on to be the union leaders in the fruit fields.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so politicians started to attend the Choricero games because they knew that getting the Mexican vote on their side was important.
Wow.
The players in the leagues looked out for each other. Since there wasn't a lot of money, a lot of the teams would share their equipment. A lot of the choriceros even worked in Lopez's factory and then went on to become local teachers, professors, community leaders, and activists.
Really?
So I guess what I'm trying to say is baseball's all right. It's okay.
I'm glad you landed there.
Carmelita Chorizo's still around.
I love that sign off the
that logo with the pig, that was the team's logo.
Was it really?
The pig holding a baseball bat.
Yeah. I would love that jersey. That's why it's holding a baseball bat.
Yeah, he's not just beating meat out of a pig. He did other things with that bat.